for our annual fundraising. Confusion consumed me. I felt betrayed by my faith, by him, and even perhaps by myself. I began questioning whether what had happened was indeed God's will or simply a gross abuse of power. I was once again instructed to sleep in his room. Fear gripped me, but defying the anointing of God was unthinkable. We had been told that such disobedience would invite a curse. The next morning, he asked if I understood God's revelation. I remained silent, unable to process what had happened. He then referenced me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 12, explaining that just as Jesus humbled himself and obeyed God, even to the point of death, so he too must obey God's will by partaking in carnal things. He claimed this was necessary for him to understand the human experience and to fully empathize with others. Bridges behind my life, and I could hardly go back because it would mean starting all over again. My family was poor and I had no connections. My option was to stay because I was still bothered with what if it was indeed God's will. December of the same year was an escape for me. Caroling as one of our sources of funds, and which had been participated in by accused of staying away from the worker's house in Manila where he stayed. In January 9, Philippines, I seized the opportunity to send a personal letter to ACQ. In that letter, I poured out my feelings, openly expressing my emotional distress. I was honest about how deeply shocked I was to learn of his life beyond the pulpit. The man I had revered as a holy figure was in reality immortal. My genuine commitment and dedication to God. My faith with time Apollo Quiboloy would come to Manila. My only relief was when one of the girls would accompany him, giving me an excuse not to sleep with him. I kept myself busy before becoming a full-time worker. I had only one goal. As the Bible says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, I quote, nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust. But how disobedience and complaints were never an option. And was labeled as always twisted. One day, she said, "Sir has noticed that you've been distant." I made up excuses, trying to avoid the truth. I had been telling Tassie and Dan that I was extremely exhausted. She presumed that I was just too focused of my responsibilities, especially in the logistics department. I was always pressured to meet my 15 million quota. Every December on caroling season, if ever the sense that there was really something wrong with my belief, I was instructed to prepare my documents for my USA visa, and I believe realization came later when I already left from his group that it was also to distance me from the workers and members here that I might be able to tell his dark secret. I never wanted to go to America because inside of me were unresolved spiritual issues, confused mind that bothered me always, but my visa was approved. I didn't know that I was to lead and plan for the fundraising to be done in America, and we would employ the same strategy of our money making here in the country. In America, I witnessed the double standard life. What we prohibited in the Philippines, we did them there. We lived in luxury. We toured around. We dined in fine and expensive restaurants. We watched movies. Sky's the limit when they went shopping. I decided to stay in the apartment where the minister and his family lived. Despite the insistence of ICC to stay with them, I refused. I made a lot of excuses. Sapagkat, hindi ko po natin na kaming nasa Amerika ay masyadong nagpakasasa sa paggasta sa pera na masyadong pinaghirapan ng mga kapatiran at ng mga full-time workers. Bilang namuno po sa crusades, evangelism at logistics departments, saksi po ako kung paano nagsakripisyo ang bawat isa para lang makapagbigay sa iba't ibang pangangailangan sa simbahan. Nanood na ng sine, pero kami sa Amerika, halos linggo-linggo nanood ng sine, bawal sa amin ito dati. Naghirap ang maraming workers at members sa pagkaruling at pagsulisit sa bawat tao sa lahat ng dako dito sa ating bansa. May namatay, may na-aksidente, may nakulong, may mga na-rape pa na hindi na na-report. Dahil may kasalanan na itinago, kaya napahintulutang nangyari. Lahat may kota, di ba? After December season, ang mga members kailangang magtinda ng mga kakanin para maibigay sa mga pledges for Alay kay Kristo, building funds, love offerings, television pledges, tithes and others. And when they could not provide for their own foods, they would just resort to fasting. Meron din pa akong quota, 10 to 15 million pesos to raise in the month of December alone. I organized the carolers nationwide to meet my quota. We recruited and trafficked. Children's Way Foundation, tulong sa may kapansanan, handog ng pagmamahal, pagdamay sa dukha, Shivers for Christ. The supposed income na dapat ibigay sa mga beneficiaries, sa mga nasabing associations, hindi naman talaga truthfully and honestly na ibigay. Only a little portion of the income. Then, she informed me that ministers wrote letters to ACQ and reported that I tempted and fornicated with them during my visits to their satellite churches. I was so shocked to learn the sudden accusations. I also wrote a letter and enumerated the real circumstances of my life with all the ministers I came in contact with in relation to our aggressive fighting the National Logistics Coordinator. However, that was not enough. Making it appear that I was a sinner who committed all kinds of sins, including those I had committed before joining the ministry. I would be totally forgiven from my old sins and burdens. Soul sinner, and I was filthy. Upon realizing how angry ACQ was, I revised my letter out of fear and stated that I had sinned because I truly was filthy. In detail, I imagined sins just to appease the anger of our leader, Apollo C. Quiboloy, not knowing it would become my death sentence later. My exaggerated story was then distributed to all his leaders and ministers, and they believed I was filthy, I was pervert, and I was wicked, painting me as the sole guilty party, while ACQ remained innocent. Little did I know this confession would lead to my condemnation. October 15, 1998, I was sent back here to receive. The plan for me was beyond my imagination. It took me 7 months to suffer hunger and isolation in the mountain of Tamayong in Kalinan, Davao City. They placed me in a small, dark, elevated room beside a kitchen, separated only by a mat slabs with exposed nails pressing into my back as I slept. I woke up this morning in pain, with no beddings, and the cold October nights left me shivering. I requested a blanket and a mat, but I was denied. Every day from 8 to 5 p.m., I followed a strict routine, regardless of the weather, enduring hunger and isolation. No one allowed near me, as I was labeled filthy and deserving of this punishment. Members were forbidden to speak to me. I was physically very weak and so depressed. I prayed that God would just take my life. Ilang beses po ako nanalangin na sana kunin na lang ng Panginoon. I started to question God and wondered if this was truly a divine process. He imposed to believe that I really was a sinner and that I was recuperating from my spiritual disease for the lack of faith. That was to justify my present pains and to at least lighten my burden of loneliness. On January 8, 1999, I gave ACQ a resignation letter, and I requested for a fare so that I can travel back to my home in the letter. I pleaded to Ingrid, and like a child, I cried for help. But she remained untouched, telling me that it was a divine process. After that conversation, misery doubled. I had no money, and I was still physically weak, so there was no way for me to go out from the compound of the prayer mountain. Waiting for the restoration was the only alternative at the moment. If not, they continually accused me of sins they alone knew and imagined that would always lead me into fasting. It eventually hardened my heart because I started to realize that the purpose of doing it was to totally break me down and to even slowly kill me. No longer saw the reason to stay. I submitted my resignation as a full-time volunteer worker for the second time. But Apollo Quiboloy refused it again. A week later, on September 30, 1999, I decided to leave without asking for permission, determined to free myself from his control. It was only when I left out of the group that I finally clearly understood that the man I had believed to be God's chosen and holy was an impostor, oppressor, and deceiver. He manipulated me using his authority and power as God's anointed. I thank God that he took me out from his bondage, from that ambiguous feeling of fear mingled with so much love and loyalty to my Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Me, Alex Camia, his personal bodyguard, a full-time worker, once known to be a champion in gun shooting before he joined the group of ACQ, together with his team, kept coming to my place to harass me, serving a fake warrant of arrest to a minister who stayed in my house. This minister settled in my place after he was gunned down in and there was also a red plate. The registered owner of the car was Apollo C. Quiboloy. Because of their failure to serve the warrant of arrest, they blamed me for hiding.